Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth with Trudy. We have a great show for you this week. This has been a week of extraordinary emotion for Israel, a moment of deep relief, gratitude, and renewed faith. After 2 years of war, the hostages are finally home. The images of their return, families reunited, a nation standing still, have stirred the hearts around the world. We are profoundly thankful to President Trump and his team, whose determination and leadership made this historic deal possible, a deal that has brought life, hope, and healing to so many. And yet, even as we rejoice, we do so with a new clarity. This war has not only tested Israel's strength, it has revealed how much of the tools of war themselves have changed. We've seen the rise of new technologies on the battlefield: drones, precision guided weapons, AI driven intelligence, and cyber attacks that can cripple nations without a single shot being fired. This has been a very different kind of war, one that shows us the future of conflict in our world today. To help us understand this and what it means for Israel and for modern warfare as a whole, I'm joined by Brigadier General Yaron Rosen, one of Israel's most accomplished defense innovators. Yaron served for over 30 years in the IDF, rising to become chief of IDF cyber staff, where he led Israel's groundbreaking advances in both defense technology and cyber. A decorated Air Force pilot and commander, he helped transform how Israel integrates intelligence and innovation into every aspect of defense. Today, Yaron continues that mission in Israel's high-tech and cyber sectors, advancing the country's strategic edge and shaping the defense thinking of the future. He joins us to share his insights on how this war and the technologies that defined it will reshape how Israel and the world prepare for conflicts of tomorrow. Welcome to the show, Brigadier General Yaron Rosen. So great to have you with us.
Thank you, Trudy. A pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
So let's start right in. When we look at conflicts today, whether in Israel or in Ukraine, and we see that wars are no longer fought only with tanks and planes, they've become laboratories for new technology: drones, missile defense systems, AI-driven intelligence gathering, and this is redefining the rules of combat. Nations are learning from each other's experiences in real time, studying what works, adapting quickly, and developing their own innovations. From your perspective, what stands out most about how modern warfare has evolved, and how has Israel's experience with systems like Iron Dome, Arrow, influenced or been influenced by what we're seeing on the battlefields around the world? I know that's a really detailed, dense, loaded question, but we're also interested in hearing about this.
Perfect. I'll try to simplify it as best as I can.
Okay.
For everyone, for your listeners. I think we need to accept the fact that it has many faces. This change is multi-layered, and we need to understand all the layers and complexity of change. That's why it's hard to cope with it, because countries, nations, governments are slow moving and sometimes change, especially with technologies, super fast. And we just, it's really hard to catch up with all these changes when you're talking about militaries that need to change the way they conduct war. There's always a feeling that we're fighting the last war instead of the current or the next, or preparing for the next one. So we just have to bear that in mind when we talk about all these changes at once. And I think it goes to a few areas. Let's talk first of all about how we do defense and offense separately, okay? And defense, if we just go 100 years ago, okay, when we do defense, we're talking about trench warfare, right? Like World War I, II. We're talking about trenches. It's a very physical warfare, lines, of defense, trenches, etc., etc. And 100 years later, the physical meaning of defense has changed greatly. During World War II, the defenses, the lines of defense were passed over through the skies, the beginning of the air forces, flight and air forces. And 100 years later, today, we have more domains that you can fight a war through. One of them is cyber, the digital domain that was built in the last 100 years, since the ages, well, actually more than 100 years. The telegraph was in the 1900s, or even before that, the 1800s, when the first telegram was sent. So until this day, 150 years later, suddenly you can fight a war through the digital domain. That is a new domain. It's man-made. It wasn't here before. It's not about, it's not about ground warfare. It's not about the seas. It's not about the skies, the air forces. It's about a digital domain, which is a man-made domain, which is very fast moving. All these things are quite new. Actually, if you think about it from the United States perspective and Israel's perspective and all Western militaries and the way nations fight wars in this digital domain, it's actually quite new. People don't understand this, but the US Cyber Command was founded in 2010. Okay.
Wow.
We're talking about baby steps. We are 15 years into embedding digital warfare, cyber command, inside the US defense apparatus. So in Israel, the same. We were just coping in the last decade or so with how we actually fight a war in cyberspace. That was part of what I did when I was still in service as the chief of the IDF cyber staff with my counterpart, the director of the NSA in the United States. We were counterparts and we were talking about how do we fight wars? How do we do defense, offense, and intelligence, which are three very different ways of fighting war inside the digital domain. Each one a very different way of doing business warfare business in the digital domain. So all these things, so the birth of the digital domain, how air forces are built, the missiles, how missiles developed, the missile warfare. Look at what our adversaries did in the last 30 years or so. It's crazy. Look on the North Koreans, look about what the Russians did since the Cold War until this day. Missile warfare, and then defensive, active defense, what we call, all from the Iron Dome all the way to the Arrow and THAAD and all these things. Where does that come from? This was not here 50 years ago, okay? So all these developments are really changing how strategically countries invest in their defense, in their offense, and in how they geopolitically align in alliances. Who do they work with in order to protect themselves? By the way, Israel is very important for missile defense because of its unique capabilities in this area. Part of the very strong ties between Israel and the United States is a program called the BMD, the Ballistic Missile Defense Program, which was co-developed in Israel and in the United States. And there's one goal to this thing, is protect Israel, protect the United States from missile threats, wherever they come from, whether it's from China, whether it's from North Korea, whether it's from Russia. We need to protect ourselves because that's where warfare is going.
So you're talking about Iron Dome and the Arrow system. So those are two very different systems. Could you just, very briefly, describe how different those two systems are?
Yeah, it's a multi-layered defense, ballistic missile defense system. The high, interdicting these missiles, ballistic missiles that go through the outside of the atmosphere and back in, is a huge challenge, right? So where you actually where the interceptor meets the missile is a very different thing if it's outside of the atmosphere or in lower levels, what we see normally on TV. That's the Iron Dome. It's a low level tactical missile defense system, tactical in the sense that it's the last layer, or it interdicts the missiles that are shorter range. But when you're talking about ballistic missiles from Iran, the energy of the missile, of the incoming missile, is so is huge. Okay, this is like 9, 10 Machs of a flying object. And in order to interdict it, you need to meet the missile as far as you can from its target. That's why you have the David Sling and the Arrow. David Sling is mid-level, and the Arrow, or the THAAD, the United States made system, is the high level outside of atmosphere interdiction. That's interception. That's how this multi-layered ballistic missile defense system is built and was developed in the last 15 years or so.
Do you see that the defensive parts of these weapons, the defensive parts of the war, or the weapons that we've created, are born out of seeing what the offense can do? I'm not sure if you understood that question, but
Can
when,
you? Yeah,
yeah.
I want to make sure.
So David Sling, Iron Dome, Arrow, these were critical to safeguarding the civilian population of Israel. Absolutely critical. So were those systems created after seeing what the offensive capabilities are, or are the defensive capabilities just dreamed up? Oh, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well,
Because as the shape of war is changing, and as the tools and weapons of war are changing, so too would our defensive systems. So it's a little scary to think that we're going to take a hit and then develop the defensive systems against it.
yeah, that's true. The cat and mouse missiles, missile versus interceptors, started way back. Okay, this is not the last 15 or 20 years, way back. But the abundance and the level of threat is just unimaginable. I think that today, post the 2 years war that we just went through, it is just unbelievable how we lived here in Israel with hundreds of thousands of missiles pointed at us every day, and that's how we lived. Now, it's very different from the Cold War when you had nuclear weapons on both sides, and there was what was called back then MAD, like there's this mutual assured destruction. So the calculus, you live your life, you don't really think about this thing because you say, okay, both sides won't do this because this is like the ultimate deterrence thing. This is about, very, very high level geopolitics. These are things that were used against us on a day-to-day basis. Israel, in a way, you might even say, got addicted to defense. And this is something people don't understand, because we got used to living with an umbrella, and everyone, everywhere, every country around us shoots missile at us, and oh, you shouldn't do anything because nothing happened to you. It's fine. You have your Iron Dome, so just live your lives. People can shoot at you. Nothing happened, and people don't get it. Like, no, it's not okay for countries, whether it's Gaza, the Palestinians, since 2005, when we stepped out of Gaza, thousands of missiles have been shot at Israel every year. Like, why is that okay? Now,
And
no one sees this, right? This is like, okay, we were the ones, we were the aggressors. No, we were not. We actually got addicted to defense. That's why we
right.
kept going in again and again and again, because we ultimately, in a way, I think the politicians, the strategic level of the leadership of Israel got addicted to the lower price of defense versus offense. And it's just something a country cannot afford. So, in a way, yes, it was developed through visionary thinking about where the threat is going. And that was gladly, we sort of are in the front line. Israel is in the front lines of ballistic missile defense with the United States. But our problem is our threat is daily. Like we live like this. And gladly, after this 2-year war, we don't have the hundreds of thousands pointed at us from Hezbollah, and we don't have the 100,000 from Gaza. And Iran is, is still pointing missiles, very energetic ones, at us, and there might be another round. We don't know. But the level of threat is acceptable. That's
so
where.
that so that's the defense part of the weapons. Now let's talk offense for just a second. Drones. So drones have become one of the most significant new tools on the battlefield. They are used for surveillance, precision strikes, defense, all without putting a pilot or soldier in harm's way. They're not the drones of a decade ago. They're faster, smarter, more autonomous, capable of doing what used to take squadrons of aircraft and crews to do. So, can you talk about how drones have changed the balance of power in modern warfare? And is that an offensive uh, weaponry system that we can see going forward as one of the most important?
Yes, I think this is a huge question, and it is almost as if this is the era of how irregular guerrilla warfare was introduced to militaries, and militaries kept losing to guerrilla warfare because these were like airplanes and tanks and ships against people with RPGs and and these called manpads. It's anti-aircraft missile, small, carried missiles. That's how the U.S. and the Taliban drove out the Russians from Afghanistan a long time ago. It wasn't with airplanes or big things. It was with small things, irregular warfare. Now, in a sense, the drone warfare, whether it's a really small drone, the DJI Chinese size drones, or it's a Shahed, which is a small bird, let's call it, like a small airplane, but it's autonomous, doesn't have a pilot, navigates by itself, has munitions enough to inflict real damage on a target, and it's accurate enough. So, in a sense, this imbalance inside air warfare is irregular air warfare. Okay, so we are introduced with something which is astonishing in warfare. And I think everybody is still, sort of trying to see, oh, what are we going to do with this? And I think we see the all militaries, including the Trump administration and Department of War, as we call it today. Pete Hegseth, in his speech to the generals in Guantanamo Bay just a few weeks back, I think he really I saw he really understands this change and the need to change how a military, which is used to buying from the big contractors, the McDonnell Douglases, the Lockheed Martins buying F-35s and B2s, right? That's one thing you need. But the thing is, you don't need only this. You need also things that have irregular air warfare capabilities, such as drones and swarms. And you need a way to do that to inflict damage on your enemy uh, in irregular air with irregular air warfare assets. That's one side, the offensive side. So the United States military, Air Force, or whoever will be responsible for this needs to know how to launch swarms of drones. How do you do that? Who's responsible? How do you build these things? What's the industry that does that? These are things that both the Department of War and the U.S. industrial base are trying to answer, right? How do you do that? So you have the Andurils and the Palantirs and all these newcomers that are not McDonnell Douglas or Lockheed Martin. Instead of building F-35s, you're building these small autonomous swarm things that have their own mind and know how to differentiate between an enemy's tank or a ship and your own in a battlefield, which will be robots against robots, basically. So this is where we're going. That's one end. And the other end, the defensive side, is actually very, very challenging. And I think we're seeing this as well. We just heard in the last week that presumably the Russians are challenging airports in, I think, Copenhagen and Denmark and in Germany, flying drones around airports and shutting them down for hours and hours. What does that mean for defense? How do you differentiate between a good drone, a bad drone, your own drone, the Russian drone, just someone playing with his own drone? That's what I call the democratization of flying objects. Like everybody can fly. It's not only air forces.
Well,
That's why it's
we saw that in New York. There was drones flying over New York, New Jersey, and people were very frightened and wanted to
yes,
know what that was. This was during the Biden administration, and
I
he never
remember.
told us. Nobody ever
Yes.
found out what those drones were.
Yeah, I saw all the conspiracy theories. Maybe it's, nuclear materials being driven through the country, and this is this thing that's monitoring the nuclear material, blah, 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 strategic command. No one told anyone what's going on, but that's exactly the point. You're spot on. The skies do not belong only to the Boeings and these manufacturers of large airplanes. Today, we have to cope with this irregular, asymmetric capability of civilian companies to build these small airplanes that are actually very, very smart, all the way to swarms, which can inflict huge damage both to critical infrastructure, all the way to, just interrupt our daily life. That's how complicated defense is today. And just think about the World Cup in the United States, which is next year, I think. Um, I think it's going to be like, think about the venues and how the FBI and the state polices will need to protect the airspaces around these events. And I assume that VIPs will be in these several places, and maybe the president and the vice president. Think about the Secret Service that need to protect the president and the vice president. I mean, these things are frightening. That's how that's how well we need to prepare for this new era of democratization of what flies in the air. Everybody can fly.
Very frightening. Very, very frightening. And
I wasn't. I didn't want to frighten you guys, but it is what it is. We have to cope with it, and we will. It's a cat and mouse.
well, I think it's important to recognize what we're fighting against. So I think you're really helping us to see what we have here. Um, you led Israel's cyber staff, one of the most sophisticated programs in the world. Can you explain to our listeners? Okay, so we spoke a little bit about it. We touched upon it because it seems like today all of these different types of weaponry are intertwined. Technology is making them intertwined. But what is cyber warfare? What is that? What does that mean? We hear about that a lot.
So cyber warfare basically is achieving operational goals using the digital space. So instead of having troops or ships or airplanes fly through the relevant um, domain which they are in, the soldiers in cyberspace fly or flow through the digital space, through the cables and the routers. And because today computers are connected to the real world, you can achieve real outcomes. Um, the very famous attack that supposedly Israel and the U.S. conducted against the centrifuges, the Iranian centrifuges, was the exact moment when everybody understood suddenly that cyber is not only about shutting down a computer if you want to shut it down, or getting intelligence from a computer, which is cyber intelligence operations. That's one thing, because collecting intelligence has really moved from, human intelligence or signal intelligence, ways that militaries did for decades. It moved into cyberspace because most of what people and countries and agencies do is in the digital space. So you had to transform all the intelligence collection capabilities into cyberspace. But that's only one part of cyber. Being able to attack through cyberspace is a very different way of operation. It requires different type of thinking. The cyber attackers are very different from cyber intelligence people and very different from cyber defenders. Each one of them has a very different way of thinking, professional capabilities, and there are many levels of cyber capacities that these armies of cyber actually the way they conduct their operations. And it is just like in other physical space, kinetic space. It starts with intelligence collection through cyber, through the digital space, and then you plan the physical, goal, whatever you want to achieve. And you can go all the way from things that are very, let's call it, computer connected. So let's say you want to attack a bank. So basically a bank is, or a banking system is computers. Yes, there are ATMs which do a physical thing. They hand you the note, the money. So, shutting down ATMs is a big issue. So that may be a physical part of attacking a financial system. But think about attacking a stock exchange. Think about, so inside this area of banking and financial system, there are huge areas which you can inflict real damage to a country. Now go to the physical area. Like, let's say if I want to shut down reactors, whether they are nuclear in the case of Iran, or centrifuges in the case of Iran, or just a regular electric a power station. All these things rely on computers that are connected to physical generators and things like that. You can shut that down through cyberspace. And maybe the extreme example is what we saw with Hezbollah, the pagers and the walkie-talkies. It is quasi cyber, and I'll explain.
Well,
Of
wait, before you get to that, because that was going to be my next question
Ah, okay,
about
okay.
the viewers. So before we get to that, because you've covered a lot of information. So firstly, with regard to how these attacks can be implemented in real time, it's what we've heard on our show is that during the 12-day war against Iran, in the first couple of days of that war, Israel actually wiped out the alternative financial system that the Ayatollah used with crypto. And that was just wiped out. And that gave Israel and America a tremendous advantage with regard to the coming 12 days. So, is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. That is something that you achieve through years of investment. Um, just like in any other type of warfare, uh, in the same way Israel neutralized the Iranian air defenses, it takes decades of intelligence and building technological capabilities in the airplanes and in the weapon systems you use in order to neutralize these air defenses. Same thing in cyberspace. The biggest difference in cyberspace is maybe that you have to be covert until the moment you press the red button. I'll call it red button because it's almost like that. Okay, it's not exactly like that. But once you press that button, everything should go according to your plan. The thing is, because the other side suspects you all the time, the biggest challenge of holding or maintaining a red button becomes the biggest investment because you have to consistently avoid your adversary's defense posture, people that look for you. Um, so it's a really sophisticated game, and holding this red button operational until the moment you need it. You may not use this red button for a decade, and then after a decade, you press it and you want it to work. So for a decade, you actually hold this thing. It's not different from other types of warfare. When you fly with an airplane into air defenses, you do as much as you can to make sure that when it crosses these new air defenses, it won't be able to, they won't be able to interdict you. But still, it's a little different. And in this case, you're actually on your enemy's doorstep in cyberspace. You're waiting there. You're actually physically in his territory all the time. That's the difference.
So, are there units in every army now that are dedicated to anticipating all of these operations and setting them in motion?
Yes, very, very much like the U.S. Forces. Israel's cyber forces are organized in the three big domains. There is the intelligence area, very much like the NSA, if you will. That's the well-known 8200 unit and others, not only them. And you have the offensive and defensive sides, the Cyber Defense Directorate, which does all the defense operations, and the offensive operations are done from a special unit somewhere in the IDF, and very much connected to both.
Incredible. Okay, so now let's talk about the beeper attack. Um, they're saying that this is going to be studied for years, maybe decades to come, representing the new way of thinking about warfare. So, do you consider that cyber? Is that a convergence of cyber and weapons coming together? Just walk us through that briefly and how incredible of a an attack that was.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's an incredible attack, and it's an incredible attack because it is the classic asymmetric warfare, and there's no center of gravity when this attacked. You can't interdict this. There's no air defense against the beeper attack because what Israel did is embedded the munition inside the enemy's system, like really embedded it, whether it's the beeper or the walkie-talkie. Like people were walking with their own destruction weapon, and they just didn't realize it. So it's so many things together. It's deception and it's supply chain attack because you want them to buy this thing, right? Somehow.
Right.
And they're looking for these things. It's not an easy thing to do, but somehow it was avoided and evaded and avoided. So at the end, it's a checkmate because this is a real attack against the fighting force. It crippled Hezbollah in a way that they just could not get over from. And when Israel coupled this with neutralizing the command and control, the high level, all the way to Nasrallah himself in his bunker, that was game over for Hezbollah. Basically, yes, it will be studied in military academies for decades. It's one of the finest military plans ever planned and executed globally.
Well, okay, so this cyber warfare, that is incredible, and we've seen how targeted it was, but how it did infiltrate the civilian population in a way that could have really impacted many more people if it was an attack on the water system or the electrical grid. So cyber has the capability now of not only targeting armies, but it could reach deep into civilian populations in ways we've never experienced before, shutting down electricity, disrupting water systems, blocking communications. So, Yaron, as someone who has led at the highest levels of Israel's cyber defense, what can people do to protect themselves in this new reality? Like, what should we be doing? Should we, in the past, there were sirens, shelters, warning systems. But in a world where the battlefield now is digital, what should we be doing? How should we be preparing differently? Should we have satellite communication tools? Should we have stored water somewhere? Like what can we do to protect ourselves?
Yeah, I think, if you ask someone living in Florida, right? And I know because I have family there. And I remember him going through one of the first hurricanes that really hit. I don't remember the name, but this was over a decade ago. And I remember him telling me the story that it was his first time it really hit their house and they had to stand in a food line. I remember the story. And since then, they have everything. But it's about where you live and what's the relative threat that you live according to, because we can't live with these atomic bunkers and everyone preparing for doomsday. It's just not a good way to live your life, and I really do not recommend living in real fear from this. And I'll tell you why. Because at the end of the day, actually, cyber is pretty soft power. And people don't realize that. Yes, it might knock down the electricity, but in 2, 3 days, most countries get over that. Unlike when you drop a bomb on an electric power station, it takes months to rebuild. So actually, if you don't think, you shouldn't change the way you think about war because of cyber. If you think you live in an area that power stations are going to be attacked or water systems, um, so get ready and have water and have a generator. But if you don't, um, governments are supposed to know how to get over these things in days. When you said that Israel hit the financial system during the 12-day war, the effect of this attack on the financial system is as long as the 12-day war. Today, they're back on their feet, right? And financially, not really. Their financial system sucks, but not because of our attack on the crypto. They lost a lot of money, and it's a brutal attack for them because they don't have an alternative to the SWIFT and other ways of paying money for goods. But still, it's softer. Okay, so you have to realize that this thing is not supposed to really inflict kinetic outcomes. When you couple it with a kinetic attack, it has real effect on your adversary. But when it's separate, you can get over with.
Well, that is encouraging. That's the most encouraging thing I've heard you say today, because it does seem like we are headed for some very frightening times with regard to what war can look at, what can look like. Um, Sadly, we're coming to the end of our discussion, and I'm going to ask you to please come back again and continue this, because it's really fascinating and so important for our listeners to know what the new shape of the world is, and you are right there and right in it. So, will you come back again?
If Trudy asks, I do.
Great. Thank you so much. But thank you also for the service that you've given to Israel and to the world. Um, we're here having this discussion, but meanwhile, you've given 30 or more than 30 years of service in the IDF, and you've protected Israel and the world. And we have a great thank you to give to you and are so appreciative. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you also for joining us today and for sharing your extraordinary insights into how this war and technologies behind it are reshaping our understanding of defense and security. What we've learned is that the future of war is already here. It's not just about borders and weapons, it's about technology, innovation, and information. And as you've made so clear, success in this new world will depend not only on strength, but also on awareness, preparedness, and the ability to adapt faster than our enemies. To our listeners, thank you for being with us for this important conversation with Brigadier General Yaron Rosen. This has been Nothing But the Truth with Trudy. You can catch us every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on the radio. But if you missed any part of this show or want to listen to any past episodes, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.